So like the title of the video says, we are going to be covering Hydroid's Tentacle Swarm ability. Now we are skipping over Undertow. Undertow interacts with a lot of his abilities, so I'm leaving it for dead last. I want to cover each and every ability, and then we're going to see how Undertow affects or modifies them in the next video. Now, getting back into Tentacle Swarm, the first thing that I want to cover is actually not about its power at all. It's actually going to be about its aesthetics. So, getting into Hydroid, we can look at appearance here. You're going to see I have these sort of appearances set. When I summon the Kraken, when I summon Tentacle Swarm, you're going to see it kind of looks like this. So that's fine. I'm actually happy with it like that. However, if you want to change your colors, I did go through each color palette option and found that not all of them matter. So if we come through here, you're going to see that these three abilities, these three color palettes, secondary, tertiary, and accent, don't actually affect your Tentacle Swarm. Your primary color affects the color of the tentacles themselves. The emissive affects the sort of colored areas that you're going to see around the tentacles. Usually it's like the suction cup area. And then the energy is going to be the energy coming out of the ground. Now with this color, it's going to look a little bit like grass. So when I go ahead and use this ability, you're going to see that the tentacles, the color palette, all comes into play here. So our suction cups are red, our tentacles are purple, and the energy coming out of the ground is green. Now, you will notice that the color isn't exactly the same as you're going to see on your Warframe. That is just the way the tentacles kind of are. It's going to be kind of grayed out, so just keep that in mind. It's not going to be the exact color you pick. But those are the color choices that affect it. Now, getting into the ability itself, we have Tentacle Swarm, and Tentacle Swarm is going to have a drain of 50. This is a little weird, a little different than most ultimate quote-unquote abilities that Warframes have. However, Tentacle Swarm is a charged ability, so we'll see that the drain is 50 when I use it. When I fully charge it, you're going to see that the drain is 100. This is pretty typical. It makes sense for how it works. I'm glad that they didn't choose to do the full energy cost as the base and instead cut it in half and made the fully charged amount the 100. So that is pretty nice of them. It's going to allow you to use this a lot more often than you would be able to normally. Now getting into the other aspect, we can see that the duration of Tentacle Swarm is 20 by default. The duration of this ability basically just affects how long the tentacles you spawn last for. So when you spawn tentacles from Tentacle Swarm and from his passive, they will actually seek out nearby enemies. These nearby enemies are grabbed if they're within a certain range. From what I can tell, the reach of the tentacles is probably about 5 to 7 meters. It's hard to get an exact number, but they're about that kind of reach. So even if the tentacle isn't right next to them, they can reach out and grab enemies. Once they've grabbed an enemy, they will have them until either the enemy dies or the tentacles despawn. This 20-second duration is that despawn rate. So if you have tentacles, they never drop an enemy, they just have a duration that they last. So there's nothing really special about duration other than the fact that it, increases the duration of your Tentacle Swarm. Getting past that, we're actually going to get into probably the most interesting aspect of this ability, and that is how it interacts with range. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and remove this, and we're going to look at the ability range. I'm going to go ahead and switch back over here so it's not so obnoxiously colored, and I'm going to summon this down here. Now when I use it just at its base level, you're going to see that it covers about this much area of effect. Now that being said, if you use it in an area where you have pillars, it will include those areas, and it can make it very difficult to spawn things how you want them to. So if I charge this up, even though the circle's kind of going out, you're going to see that because we have pillars in the middle, it's very unlikely we're going to get stuff over here and over here. You're going to see stuff spawning over here, but whenever you have this kind of ability, it seems to actually wrap the AoE around it, sort of going in this direction. So you're going to have a lot more likelihood of spawning things on the side of walls as opposed to across the flat XY axis. So just keep in mind, if you have anything going across the third dimension vertically, those are going to interrupt how your tentacle swarms can spawn. This is also going to lead into the fact that the tentacle swarm doesn't actually get more efficient as it gets bigger. So when I fully charge this ability, you're going to see that it gets, oh, let me go ahead and pick this up. When you see that it gets bigger, it does cover a larger area, and that's fine. However, when we use the ability, you're going to see that they actually get a little bit more spread out. Now, at this distance, it's going to be pretty hard for an enemy to get through here without getting picked up. Now, there are some kind of dead spots where maybe an enemy could get through. But you're going to see that if we throw on range to this ability, it's actually going to get much worse. So I'm going to go ahead and put on all of these increase to ranges that I have, Stretch and Augur Reach. We have a giant portion of range. I won't even throw the Augments on. And you're going to see that the range on this gets absolutely insane. So yeah, we're covering all over the place. But when we spawn, you're gonna be pretty dissatisfied. Now, you saw how big the circle was. There's a tentacle, there's some right there. And that has to do with the fact that A, we're clipping all of these abilities, and B, the number of tentacles that you get by charging is doubled. However, the area you're affecting is much, much more than double. Like, much more. So what does charging do? First of all, it doubles the cost. So the energy cost of 50 goes to 100. Secondly, it does not increase damage in any way. It does not increase damage. It will double the number of tentacles spawned in the area of effect. Now, each tentacle can pick up multiple enemies, but one enemy cannot be affected by multiple tentacles. There is a slight exception to this. On the spawn attack, when they first erupt out of the ground, I have seen enemies hit multiple times and launched into the air by that attack, but that is not super consistent, so we won't really talk about it too much. Finally, it triples the tentacles spawn area. So as you can see here, it actually will triple the radius of our ability from 5 to 15, and the tentacles go from 10 to 20. So jumping into range, we're actually going to look at 3 different configurations for range, and I think these are going to be really important. So the first one is going to be 0%. Now on the right, you should be able to see right now the calculation for this. And basically what we're going to be looking at is charged versus uncharged and how reliable this skill is. And reliability is sort of what you're going to be looking at when you're debating how much range to put on this ability. So if I tap the button and I just send out the base level effect, you're going to see that the tentacles don't really spread out that much, and there is a lot of coverage in a small area. Now, if I charge this up, you're going to see the circle get much larger, and when I summon it, you're going to see them spread out definitely. Now that being said, you can see over here we have a couple tentacles. Over here there's a couple. There's a decent concentration here in the middle. Then we have some over here. So you're going to start seeing holes in your tentacle configuration the larger the area of effect that you get. Now, that is going to mess up your efficiency or your reliability of the skill. Also, keep in mind when you use this ability in between, let me grab a full charge right here. When you use it in between walls like this, even though the circle says it's going all the way out over there, when I'm using it here, it really doesn't do that. And you can see it's very unlikely to have any tentacle spawn here or here. And that's because it actually stretches across these surfaces as well. So when you actually see this, you're often going to see it hit the walls or sometimes even probably the ceilings in these kinds of situations. So when you do this, just know that walls, vertical surfaces do matter. And if you are going across those walls, you are very unlikely to spawn tentacles on both sides depending on how tall the object is. So we can already see from a 0% configuration that this ability does not scale extremely well into any environment that isn't flat. Additionally, we are limited to 20 tentacles. So given the fact that even at a full charge we get 20 tentacles, you're going to see gaping holes even if we don't have a huge range. Now, on the right there, that's what those numbers are talking about. If you have the excuse me, if you have a tentacle spread out across a certain amount of range, it will have X reach. Now that reach seems to be about 5 to 7 meters regardless of our range stat. So they don't actually reach further when you get more range. They do, however, spread out more, meaning they have to cover more area. So that tentacle reach problem is going to get bigger and bigger when we have a larger amount of area to affect. So going ahead and coming in here, let's put on a bunch of range mods, and you're going to see that this problem gets even worse. So let's go ahead and grab Overextended, Stretch, and Auger Reach. And I won't even put the Exilis mod on, but you can see we get a lot of range right here. If I go ahead and I throw this down, you're going to see at its base form, it's already very large and very spread out. So even at its base form, we're going to have a decent bit of coverage, but you're going to notice problems right off the bat. And when I fully charge this, you're going to immediately see the problem. So as I'm charging this, look how much of the screen turns white. You're going to have tentacles all over the place. They're clipping walls and ceilings and all sorts of things. You're going to have very poor coverage, and this skill's not going to be reliable. So keep in mind, looking at the 265% calculations over there, you're going to see how much ground a tentacle has to cover. And this is where we come into sort of something interesting for Warframe, in that sometimes a negative is actually okay or even good for a build. So coming in here, we're going to go into range again, and we're actually going to put in narrow-minded. So this increases our duration massively and actually decreases our range. So putting that calculation on the right, we see that the amount of concentrated area that we get if we just cast it is extremely concentrated. It's extremely small, and they do reach past their initial spawn point. So your coverage is still going to cover, you know, at least probably 10 meters, probably more like 15. But if you charge it, you're going to get a pretty respectable range on this thing with extreme reliability and coverage. Now, that's how I would tend to use this skill. If you can find an area on a map where you can get a checkpoint, nothing is going to come through this, and that is also going to give us really easy access to a high amount of duration, which means we can spec all of our other points, all of our other mods into something else and still have a very reliable duration on this skill. So moving on, if I come over here and I spawn an enemy, we're going to see that the enemy takes damage on the initial explosion when we first have the attack happen, and then they're also going to take damage over time. So the initial hit is magnetic, that was the 525 you saw right there, and then they're going to take 200 damage over time. Now that damage right there is true damage, so that's pretty nice. It's not super high amounts of base damage, so we're not going to be able to scale it that well. However, if I go ahead and put on some strength, we're going to notice a couple interesting things. So we'll probably stick away from that one because we won't be able to cast as many times, but we did put on some strength. Let's go ahead and look at what our strength became. So we should be dealing 280 damage now. So we were dealing 200, so we can expect, you know, a 40% increase in damage. However, this is one of the weird things about this skill. When you have the initial impact portion, see that 1000 damage that we had? It actually double dips into our ability strength for the initial hit. So the initial hit is actually whatever strength you put on it squared. So if you put 100% damage, it's not actually going to double your damage. It's going to do way more than that. So just keep that in mind. The true damage is affected normally, so 40% more damage. We went from 200 to 280. That makes sense. Also notice sometimes you're going to get this weird spawn pattern where they literally spawn all in the exact same spot. I'm not 100% sure why this happens. It's usually when I spawn it on an enemy directly, but not always. I haven't been able to get consistent results with that. So the final thing that we're going to cover is the augment. Now the augment is one of the best reasons to actually run Hydroid at all. So if we run over here and we grab the augment, I believe it is called Pilfering Swarm, this thing is going to double the chance at additional drops. This is very similar to certain other frames abilities, such as a desecration ability. So Pilfering Swarm does increase drastically our chances at getting drops. Now, this is increased further if we're actually parting the enemies out via the slash proc or even the combs. I believe the combs still has a better version of the slash proc for whatever reason. So just keep in mind there is one aspect to Pilfering Swarm that is very important, and that is the enemies have to be currently held by the tentacle when they die. That means if the tentacles have despawned or the enemies have been launched by them and you kill them in the air, that doesn't matter. They have to be currently held, taking that damage over time for this to be effective. Now, the final thing that I want to note about Tentacle Swarm is it says in the wiki, and it says this, that enemies are slowly kind of pulled around, making it easy to shoot them. I really don't kind of agree with this. Enemies are very difficult to hit while you're in there. So just, no, he's clipped into the ground right now, so that's kind of nice, but you know, bring an AoE weapon. That's going to serve you much better than trying to hit headshots or whatever. So just aim towards the center of your tentacle swarm, especially considering you're going to have like 10 enemies in here. You just fire away and you just let them go off. And it's going to serve you a lot better than trying to individually shoot enemies that are in your tentacles. So, as always, if I have missed anything or misrepresented anything, please let me know in the comment section below. And thanks for watching.